this image summarizes it up instantly. I'm going to explain a little bit further in detail as to how this makes any sense. This image, if you look, there's no words. There's no words. I don't know what words to use. We share the same being. We share the same being. This is a visual representation of the fact that we share the same being as everything. Look, this is the absolute. This is the relative. The absolute manifests itself into finite form, which is a localization. So imagine this is the absolute. This is like the ocean. This finite form here is the mind, right? Obviously, the image loses its power when it starts to, turn into this little body here. But let's just say that the body is also made of this absolute. The absolute, if you look, you can't have an experience here, you can't have an experience here, you can't have an experience here. You experience here, right? What's that? That's the finite localization of the absolute. That's what the mind is. A localization of the absolute, or an apparent localization. It's like a point of view of infinity. If you experienced infinity in this area, you wouldn't experience anything. It's absolute. It's everything. The minute that you localize or kind of place yourself inside it somewhere, you can start to have an experience. But that means that every other seeming separate person is the absolute. Everyone is the same being if we're going to give any words to it. So we share the same being. There's no distance between anyone. Look, how close is that to that? Nothing. There's no distance, right? Because this is absolute. So we perceive this absolute. When we look at a 2D image representation, this looks like it's at a distance from this part, right? But it's not at a distance from it. You see, it's like, how close is this empty space to the empty space in your room? Zero. It's the same empty space. You see what I mean? So the absolute is not at a distance from anything, and no one's at a distance from anything. This is a 2D representation. We can't stretch it that far, but imagining that this is the absolute, it's at a zero distance. And the only thing that seems to be separate is when we view it from a separate point of view. Look, separate point of view, different person, but it's not. It's the same being. So your consciousness that you're experiencing right now is the same consciousness I'm experiencing right now. And this absolute is consciousness. Now, when we take the path, when I say consciousness, I mean the knowing element of your experience, the part of your experience where there is knowing, where you know things. There's awareness of awareness. You are aware of being aware. That, when we take that in, we lose, so to speak, awareness, because to know this isn't anything. To know this area right here is the absolute. There's nothing to know. So awareness, you could say, recoils in itself. Imagine that this point of view was to absorb back again into the wholeness of the absolute. There's nothing to know. So you can't really know awareness. There's nothing really to know there. So that's what we call the absolute. That's pure. We could consider it this is what the Indian traditions know as pure consciousness. Consciousness that doesn't know anything. And you can't even know consciousness because it can't be known. You can't know. Consciousness can never be known in the same way that the sun can never be lit. But it doesn't mean that it isn't knowing, because in the same way the sun can't be lit, the sun lights itself. It is light, you see? So this is a representation of what the truth is. And if we just live in this understanding, it's really as good as it needs to get. You know that you're just in love. You're in love because you know that everything that you seem to experience outside of yourself isn't really outside of yourself. And because it's not outside of yourself, you understand every single person is you, from a new point of view, or a different point of view, a unique point of view. And you can now enjoy the appearance of duality, even though it's not fundamentally real. You can enjoy it and love it and appreciate it, because that's life, that's beauty, that's true beauty. Beauty is when this guy recognizes this guy as the same being. Well, that's actually what we call love. But if there was another object, let me be a landscape. The experience of beauty is when we lose the sense of separation through the faculty of perception. So love, beauty, and truth, they're the same thing. So if we just live from this place, from this understanding, that's as good as it needs to get. You don't need to do anything more than that, so long as you understand that this is, the primary the primary the primary baseline of the universe, what we would call the universe. So this understanding is extremely important, because this is what's going to make you realize that you're unconditionally happy. Nothing outside of you can ever condition your happiness. This absolute, this is where happiness is. That's what happiness is. Happiness, unconditional happiness is this recognition. It's the understanding that everything in the seeming separate world isn't separate from you and doesn't limit you. And from that point of view, the absolute, because it is already everything, it doesn't resist anything. Resistance is the only place suffering can come from. You can't have suffering if there's no resistance. So if there's no resistance to anything, there's no suffering to anything. And as a wise man once said, with his bald head in a gown, enlightenment is the end of suffering. The Buddha I'm referring to, in case you didn't know. The Buddha said enlightenment is the end of suffering. That's it. What other word do we use for the end of suffering? Happiness. Happiness is the end of suffering, obviously, right? Put two and two together. Happiness is the end of suffering. You're not happy if you're suffering. You're not suffering if you're happy. This understanding is unconditional happiness, because there's no conditions left, because you've recognized what you are. So there's nothing left to limit you. So to even use any words to describe this anymore, this is why I found it at first, we just look at that, it's just nothing to say. There's nothing to say about it. This is why usually the best communication about this is silence. But, for the idiots like me, I like to use words. Anything relative, anything that starts and stops, comes and goes, is a non-existent thing. In other words, if we find existence in a fence, it's not the fence that has existence, it's the wood. If we find existence in the wave, it's not the wave that has existence, it's the water. If we find existence in the ocean, it's also not the ocean that has existence, it's the water. You see? If we have a movie, if we find existence in the movie, it's not the movie that has existence, it's the screen. Notice that everything that comes and goes, starts and stops, arises and disappears, finds itself in a greater reality. So something that starts is implicit with something that ends. It cannot start and not end. If it starts, it does end, even if it's in a very, very long time away. Anything that starts ends. And what we find is that the universe, everything in it, think about it like this, the only thing that renders the universe a universe is the objects inside it. Imagine an objectless universe. There would be no universe. There would be no space. There would be no time. Time and space are only relative to the objects that are within it. So when we have the experience of time, we never have the experience of time. There's only the continuous now. So time is like the moment where we think a thought and then another thought takes place. So when we think a thought, for example, there's a thought, then there's a gap, then there's another thought. The gap between the two thoughts was pure timeless eternity, pure consciousness. And the mind's best interpretation of what happened in that gap is then the superimposition of time. We think, well, I don't know what took place there. Nothing took place there. It must have been the passage of time. And we start to measure the same infinite eternal now with a movement. We measure it with an object. Back in the day, it was using the shadow of an object in coherence with the sun. Now it's a clock. We just measure it with another object moving. We can only measure time and space in reference to an object. Without an object, time and space do not exist. They have no independent... Time and space only exist in peripheral. They do not exist when you actually look at them. You cannot study time and space because time and space are concepts appropriated to the experience of our reality. So what happens then is that everything takes place in one eternal now, and this eternal now is a timeless, formless, spaceless continuum. Science calls this the field of pure potentiality. Nothing takes place outside it, everything takes place inside it, and because there's no outside or inside it, technically, or because there's no outside, there's technically no inside of it. So in the same way that a vase that's made of clay, the vase isn't inside the clay, it's neither outside the clay. The vase doesn't exist. The clay exists. The vase has no existence. It's a temporary name and form of the clay. The clay, being the clay, has no inside or outside experience. Nothing takes place outside of the clay. Nothing takes place inside the clay. The clay is clay. Likewise, consciousness, the pure field of pure potentiality, is reality. And reality has no inside or outside. It's both inside out. So reality is never having any type of start or stop. However, the experience that we have of starting and stopping is the field of relativity. This is the third dimension. So the third dimension basically has what we could call a localized point of view. So instead of the experience of everything, which reality has, if you were to experience just reality by itself, it would be like the experience of everything all at once, and everything cannot take place at the same time if we want to experience it, because if we experience everything all at once, it just looks like nothing. It'd be like a blank screen. So in order to have the experience of anything, we have to have an individual point of view. That individual point of view is what we call the finite mind. This is what our mind is. It's an individual point of view. The mind consists of two things: thought and perception. Perception includes the 5 faculties of our mind, which we call sight, smell, touch, and taste. The body is a center point of those sensations. It doesn't have its own existence. The body is not a body in the way we think it is. If we close our eyes, the body is just a sensation. If we open our eyes, our body is just a color. Color is a thing that is created by the mind. The body doesn't have color. An apple doesn't have red or green. Clouds don't have white. You see, nothing has color. Color is a mind-created experience. When we look at the body doesn't have color, just like no other object has color. So we only know the body as a color and a shape. Well, basically a color. All shape can be reduced to color because you cannot have a color without a shape. And you cannot have a shape without a color. So they are reduced to each other. So the body actually has no size or shape. And even if you go to the direct experience of the body, you find that there is absolutely no size or shape to it. There's no reference. If you just go off your direct experience, the body has no size or shape. The body is a morphing, foam-like quality of cloud, if we want to put it into metaphorical, poetic words, and it has no border. So if you were to take the experience of just your hand right now, there's absolutely no distinction between each finger. When you appropriate the idea of a hand, you will be able to find that because you're superimposing a solid, dense shape. If you take away the concept, your hand doesn't have a size or a shape or a border. You won't be able to find the part where your fingernail starts and the finger begins. You see, you cannot find these borders. You won't be able to find the distance between this finger and this finger. Sight is an appropriated concept which has been explored in science to have no correlation whatsoever. So when we close our eyes, we are literally experiencing a completely different universe to what we think we're experiencing with our eyes open. So when we close our eyes, we see that the body is formless, has no size, has no shape. Then we find that the experience of the world is actually made of the same sense perceptions that we call our mind. For example, when we touch something, an object doesn't have sensation. You see, objects don't have it. We don't open up an object and inside the object find sensation. We never find it. The same as if we were to listen to a sound of an object, if we were to taste an object, smell an object, the object never has the qualities that we actually experience. So if we were to look at an apple, for example, we could taste the apple, but the apple doesn't have the taste. The taste is a mind experience. It's an interpreted experience. Then we go to the smell. The object, again, doesn't have, this is all proven in science, it doesn't have these qualities. Then we go to touch the apple. The apple doesn't have sensation. That's the only thing we know of the apple. It doesn't have inherent in the apple this little thing called sensation that we then touch. We never touch anything other than the experience of a sensation which is not in the apple. So what happens then is we think that there's something in the object that we're experiencing that is inherent in the object, when in fact, the only thing we actually experience is purely an experience of our mind. So none of the objects that we experience have the experience that we're actually thinking that we're having. We're only having a mind experience. So the objects we experience, they don't exist. There's no existence of them. Their existence, just like we said that the existence of the existence of the fence is the wood, the existence of the movie is the screen, the existence of the ocean is the water, the existence of the mind is consciousness. Therefore, the existence of our perceptions is consciousness. Therefore, all experience is limited to consciousness. All objects are therefore modulations of consciousness. Therefore, what we call time and what we call space, infinite time, infinite space, or eternal time and infinite space, they are merely the mind's best interpretation of formless, dimensionless, infinite, eternal consciousness. And that's what we appropriate in the gaps of perception where no object takes place. So just to break that down a tiny bit further, what we find is the best interpretation the mind has to interpret an experience that it has no access to, it creates what we call time and space. Space is only there in reference to an object. If there was no object, there would be no space. If thought was an experience, there would be no seeming experience of time. Time is the gap between thoughts. This the infinite gap between thoughts. We superimpose a passage of time, but time never really takes place. So it's not about looking to have a timeless, eternal experience. It's noticing that all we have ever been experiencing is a timeless, eternal experience. The one we're already having is already that. So we don't need to change our experience. We don't need to change ourselves. We just need to see reality with clarity. So therefore, there's no inside world, there's no outside world, there's no inside consciousness, there's no outside consciousness. Consciousness is reality. And even if we take away the consciousness aspect, we could say that existence is reality, the fact of existing. There's no separate objects in this universe. Everything is inherently one. The job is not to remove the sense of duality. The job is to see duality is implicit with non-duality. Duality is implicit with reality. This happens to be where the source of happiness and peace takes place. It takes place in the recognition that what we are is infinite and eternal. That there is no separation between ourself and the world, no separation between ourself and other. Then we can enjoy the beauty of the duality of those relationships when we experience them in the world in that way. The world is both a giving and a receiving, an infinite giving of love, love being the dissolution between subject and object, or love being the dissolution between self and other. We come together as two, we merge together as one, and we dance in that. That's the beauty of life. Non-duality is a phase. And what you usually don't hear is the full picture. The full picture is not it doesn't really have an ending to it. But the thing that's important to see is that this whole paradigm, everything that you've learned, every teacher you watch on YouTube about non-duality is pointing, it's like this kind of like non-dual paradigm where it talks about recognizing your true nature. Recognizing your true nature is a phase, and understanding and learning from non-duality and implementing the traditional non-dual teachings is a phase, in the same way that it's a phase for a boy to become a man. So the whole non-dual paradigm is akin to a boy becoming a man. It's just this one part of the broader spectrum of life. And this part where we learn non-duality, we learn about the absolute, we learn about pure consciousness, we learn about the nature of reality, we learn about understanding what we are. And understanding what we are is basically God. The essence of life is non-dual, not two. There's no more than two things in the universe. And what happens is we associate then the ultimate truth as being the absolute reality. And the absolute reality is absolute, you see? There's nothing else other than the absolute. And that's true. But the thing is that we're still here eating, sleeping, farting, pooing. We're doing all the human animal stuff. And that is going to continue to happen after your non-dual realization. After realizing you're God, what you'll realize is that God doesn't want to be God. God doesn't want to be the absolute. God is being absolutely everything that we're experiencing right now. God wants to be the phone, the pen, the pencil, and God is also not the pen and the pencil. But for all purposes to do with actually living life, that is what God wants to be doing. In fact, everything you see is made of desire. Everything that is vibrating into existence, God wants it to be there. Life wants it to be there. Wanting isn't this thing that we think it is. We interpret wanting like, oh, I want a cup of tea, I want a cup of coffee, I want to go to the park. That's the human expression of wanting. That desire-ness is how through the finite mind, it gets computated into the world that we experience, and that's what we call a wanting or a desire. But the true energy that is creating and sustaining the experience of everything is pure desire. It's made of that's what desire is. Desire is pure God energy. So imagine Adam and Eve, they're in the Garden of Eden. They're in the Garden of Eden, and then all of a sudden, there's just absolute perfection. And God says, hello guys, do whatever you want, just don't touch the apple of knowledge. That apple, it's going to ruin your lives, don't want you to touch that. So they go, okay, God, thank you, and they carry on in bliss. But they didn't know anything other than the Garden of Eden. So what this does is it sparks curiosity. Adam and Eve go, and they go curious, this tree though, this apple does look quite enticing. And Eve's there like, hey Adam, and she's like showing the apple, pretending to bite. And he's like, Eve, don't do that. God said no. She's like, I'm not really going to. And then all of a sudden the snake comes, the snake of desire, the devil. And all of a sudden they end up eating the apple of knowledge. The apple, they now have reality. This is akin to the yin and yang symbol, right? This is a perfect analogy for it. The yin and yang symbol, you have the black, you have the white within the black, and you have the black within the white. Adam and Eve were in the white. Absolute reality. This is symbolic of absolute reality. Not knowing what you are. Pure absolute, just existence, pure God. And then all of a sudden they bite the apple of knowledge. They go into the black. The black is not ignorance, the black just means duality. And then in the black, they create ignorance because they do not have memory of the white. They don't have memory of the bliss because you cannot remember the absolute. The absolute is zero-dimensional. Pure being is zero-dimensional, has no form, color. You can't remember that. So there's no reference point when they're in duality, which just means experienced, having an experience, not having the experience of everything and having the experience of something, because the experience of everything is nothing. So having an experience, in order to do that, there is duality. There's the potential for us to see differences, to see polarity. And polarity is duality, and this duality is what we experience in order to have an experience. Because Adam and Eve can't remember being in the absolute, there's no reference point, and they're in an experience now that requires reference points. But if there isn't one, they don't know. That is what I do not know. Ignorance. I do not know where I am, where I'm from, what's going on. So Adam and Eve are in ignorance, and now they're searching the lands to try and figure out how to be. First of all, they're trying to survive. Then they're building fires, they're putting clothes on, they feel naked. And then all of a sudden they live and they're like, right, Adam, this isn't enough. Now that we can do all the things, we can have as much sex as possible. What do we do? What's left to do now? I'm bored. Well, we could try and actually find happiness because we seem to be lacking it. Why are they lacking it? Because they left the absolute state to be in ignorance, and ignorance is filled with duality. And in duality, duality is not the problem. They created ignorance and separation. They basically believed that duality is fundamentally real. So duality, plain old duality, absolutely fine, nothing wrong with it. It's an intelligent trick, an intelligent creation from God. They didn't, because there was no reference point to reality, they said this is reality. Duality is reality. And believing duality is fundamentally real is what creates separation. Separation is what creates
suffering. Believing you are fundamentally separate from the whole is what suffering is. That is the essence of suffering. Therefore, Adam and Eve will suffer. Having no reference point, nothing else to point to, they seek for happiness and can't find it. All of a sudden, they realize that there is nothing to separate them from experience. And then they have their non-dual awakening. They do practices, meditation, God knows what, just like you've probably done yourself. And then you realize, oh, reality isn't two. There is no duality. Oh my God, this is amazing. And then they run around and they're so happy. And then all of a sudden, they start to fall into ignorance again. How does this happen? Adam, I'm really confused. We just went back into reality. Why am I back into duality? This doesn't make any sense. And then separation is created again. So there's like an awakening and then there's like an unawakening because they think duality is a problem. They think because I can see the difference between a pen and a pencil, there is duality, and duality they think is suffering. They think duality is a problem. Duality is not the problem. So non-duality is literally just the phase where you recognize there is the nature of reality, which is that it is not dual. That's it. It's just this recognition reality isn't separate. Then the rest of the path comes, which is actually integrating the understanding of what duality is. Duality is not something we need to run away from. Duality is supposed to be in complete coherence with our understanding. So we actually want duality to shine with reality. And the only reason duality doesn't shine with reality is because you have believed duality to be fundamentally real. But if it's not fundamentally real, then you're going to have an issue when you know duality is not fundamentally real, but you've just spent the past few decades of your life believing it is. So all these conditions, they come on the layer of thought, feeling, and perception. And this is exactly what I take people through in my community if you want to check it out. But what we're doing here is basically understanding that on the yin and yang symbol, what happens is we have people who are in the white. People are in the black, which is duality, but then they believe that there is duality is real, so then there's ignorance there as well. Then they experience the white. They have some sort of awakening experience. And then all of a sudden, what happens? They think that is the only place to be. So then they go back into ignorance again because, oh my God, but there's still duality. This doesn't make sense. That triggers a new unawakening. And then what happens is there's more resistance and they try to leave duality to go back to non-duality. And this is just another pitfall on the path. So this is what you're not going to get told by your traditional teachers. You might. There's probably been the cases where you have, but this needs to be exposed. This is something so super important, it has to be known. Everything that we're experiencing is completely okay. The only issue is that there will be layers of thought, feeling, and perception that will trigger the belief in separation, not the belief in duality. Duality is a perfect illusion. Who wants to watch a movie? Who wants to watch a movie so just all you can see is the TV? Well, you can't enjoy the movie if all the time the only thing you can see is the screen. You see, you want to forget the screen is there and experience the movie. Now, in this analogy, we don't necessarily want to forget our true nature. We just want our true nature to be shining in the world of duality. So we start by accepting duality is completely fine, and we start to integrate. Then what is it that makes me convinced that duality is fundamentally real? And then you start realizing, wow, I see separate objects. I hear sounds outside myself. My thoughts are in my head. Sounds are out here. If thoughts are in my head, I must be in my head. I feel like I'm in the body. My body, I can't get outside of my skin. I can't read other people's minds. All these things will come flooding through. All these like limitations you think you have that seem to prove to you that duality is reality. In other words, that materialism is real and that you are a separate self and that you do exist inside the body and that you are fundamentally temporary and limited. This is the crux now. This is your job. Your job is not to try and be non-dual. Your job is actually to be so interested in duality that you actually start to explore it. Because in exploring duality, are you able to see reality? Because you've seen reality, you've had an awakening that has taken you to understand the nature of your being, but it wasn't enough. Why wasn't it enough? Why are you still suffering? It's because you haven't integrated the whole spectrum. So the phase of non-duality that we all hear from our favorite YouTubers is a phase. And we have to emigrate from the phase. The boy that becomes the man doesn't dwindle in becoming a man. He just is a man, you see? But here's the interesting thing. The man was always latent in the boy. In other words, non-duality was always latent in duality. And the boy is always latent in the man. You see, when the boy becomes the man, the boy is still there. You see, we don't want to remove the boy. It's just a phase that we integrate. So the man still wants to have his playfulness, his joy, metaphorically speaking. And likewise, we want to have both duality and non-duality. We're not trying to strip the two away. So the biggest pitfall on the path is when you fundamentally believe your current state of mind that is capable of perceiving separate objects is the wrong state of mind. That creates the next pitfall, which is the fact that you're not convinced that you can be happy unless there is a certain state of mind. So that when that is removed, you're going to be perfectly fine with what you're experiencing. But then what's going to happen is that suffering will take place. And when suffering takes place, that's your cue to say, oh, but is this true? Like, is this actually true? Is suffering the nature of my experience? And then you say, no, it's not, because it's not true. Suffering is not the nature of your experience. And then what happens is you take the investigation and you say, well, what is the nature of my experience? Well, the nature of my experience right now tells me that I've been perceiving separate people. Is separate people really a thing? Like, are people really separate? No, they're not fundamentally separate. So seeing separate people is going to trigger the trauma of separation, and you're going to believe that's real, which will make you feel like a separate self. If you feel like a separate self, you'll be seeking happiness outside of yourself in every single activity. So this is why we want to integrate these experiences so that they no longer have a pull on us to make us convinced. But we still want to respect individuality. You see, so we have to find this spiritual maturity to know we share the same being, we share the same consciousness as everybody else, but to still actually have the capacity and the intelligence to respect another individual. Because yes, we share the same consciousness, we are the same being. We want it to be as though we have individuality, because that individuality is what we enjoy sharing. So it's not just to say there's no one there and no one home and nothing to do. There's everything to do. There's a whole life to live. There's a whole like relationship family tree to be had. There's kids to birth. There's people to sing to. There's people to sing to us. There's art to be made. There's so many things to do. You just do it as reality. You do it as consciousness. You do it as being. You do it as whatever the freaking God knows what word you have to identify or just to clarify what you are. You do it as being. You do it as life. You just don't do it as a separate self. You don't do it believing I'm fundamentally limited. Let me suffer all the time because everything is an issue. You see? So now we start to integrate this with intelligence. And this, yeah, it's kind of like non-duality, but this is really something that it requires us to step away from this absolute, let me get back to the absolute, let me find a state of mind that's going to make me perfect and happy forever. It takes you away from that. And once you're away from that, you can actually start to appreciate life. You start to experience with spiritual maturity. And this maturity, it doesn't care about duality and non-duality. It just desires truth. It just desires truth, and we start to integrate into our being. Things become less of a problem. And all of a sudden, we start to be able to see that reality isn't separate, and no longer does it convince us to be so. And that's how we integrate duality and non-duality.
Think of the world like a hologram. So the first thing that we want to think about is that existence is, and this seems like such a mediocre fact, but this is actually the most profound fact, that if we understand, it is like the fabric of everything else that we understand. So the thing to see is just this simple thing: existence is. There is something rather than nothing. And the reason that this is important to just truly deeply understand is because that is absolutely fascinating. It's the most fascinating thing that we could ever possibly imagine in any possibilities in any lifetime. It is the highest fascination, because there's nothing more fascinating than something coming out of nothing, essentially. So the thing that comes out of nothing doesn't really come out of nothing. So nothing comes out of the Big Bang, right? The Big Bang didn't create an entire existence. The Big Bang, because something must have existed prior to the Big Bang for the thing to even have the substance that the world is now made of. So something was obviously there before the Big Bang. I'm not going into any astrophysics. We just want to look at the raw facts of this experience, because we cannot take any truth about anything else other than the direct experience that we're in. This is the primary focus of any scientific experiment, is to base it on the facts that we're currently experiencing. And the facts that we're currently experiencing is that there is rather than there isn't. The experience we're having emanates from existence in the form of a hologram. So there's no physical world that we experience. The world, the experiencer of the world, and the process of experiencing the world, namely the senses, they are the same thing. So if you think of like on Star Wars where they have the hologram is basically light shining and vibrating at a certain frequency that creates the three-dimensional experience of the thing, of the Mace Windu talking or something. And life is pretty much the same, except instead of witnessing the hologram from a second person point of view, like we don't look at the hologram and the hologram's there, we are both the experiencer of the hologram and the hologram itself all in one. So our experience of the body, we usually think that the body is like some kind of moving entity, and we have a consciousness in the head, and the head looks out into a separate world and we see the world. But this isn't actually true. The thing that we have to see is that in your experience right now, you have thoughts and you have perceptions. Now, you can pause the video and just double check this. There is nothing else to your experience other than thoughts and perceptions. Even memories are in the form of a perception. Your feelings are in the form of a perception. Your hunger is in the form of a perception. Perception being anything that is to do with sight, smell, touch, taste, hearing, sound. They're the only things present in experience. And then we have thoughts, things that we think. Anything we imagine is also a thought, or it comes in the form of some form of sensory experience, whether it's a smell, a taste, a touch, or a visualization. With this being said, what we want to do is actually see the fact that the only experience that we could ever have is of some form of thought or perception, which means everything that we're experiencing of the body is also just a thought or a perception. There's nothing to the body that we can directly experience that is different than a thought or a perception. Now, you can chop open the brain. The only thing somebody else will see of that brain is a perception. You're not going to see the brain. When we're actually experiencing any form of perception, we're not experiencing the actual thing. We're experiencing a perception of it. And the thing we see, we never actually see. The same is with the body. We sense the body. We say, yes, I have a body. I can touch it. It's right here. But the thing we're touching it with is itself a sensation. If you close your eyes right now and experience the hand that you're touching your leg with, it is itself a sensation. There's nothing else to it. Now, you have to do this clearly. You have to take away the thought about a hand, because that's applying another concept, which is a thought and perception. They combine. So if you take away the thought of what the hand is and actually experience the hand as it is, there's nothing else there other than a sensation. Now you say, now you have the experience of touching your leg. You're saying, yes, my body's right here, I can feel it. Well, the thing you're touching is also a sensation, and the thing you're touching it with is a sensation. So all you're doing is sensing. You're sensing a sensation. There's nothing to do with the body. The body, you have to prove it's there. Where is the proof? The only proof that's there is there is a sensation. But ask yourself this. If a body was there, how would you be able to prove it if you weren't able to see it? All you would have is a sensation. Now try and find the shape of the sensation. If you remove the concept hand, try and find an edge to the sensation that you feel called your hand. You can pause the video to do this. You won't find an edge. There's no edge to the sensation. There's no defining border. If you go to your leg, there's no edge of the kneecap. You'll never find the border. But if something doesn't have a border, how can it have a shape? You can't have a shape that doesn't have an edge. Shapes are defined by edges, right? It looks like there's a shape to a cloud, but if you go to the cloud, there is no shape to the cloud. From a distance, it looks like it has a shape,
but it doesn't. It's the same with our body. From a distance, namely from perception and thought, it looks like it has a shape. But if we close our eyes and actually experience the body, it has no shape. The body is made of sensation. So everything that we're experiencing is literally a hologram, and it looks solid and dense only when observed through the faculty of perception with our eyes. That's the only time it looks like a solid shape. But it isn't a solid shape, just like a cloud looks like a solid shape. But if you go to the cloud, it isn't a solid shape. Neither does it have any type of form. So when we talk about the observer is the observed, what we're really saying is that the one that's observing experience is itself the actual experience. Because if there is nothing other than perception, notice that perception, the thing that perceives, is the one perceiving it. You're experiencing it as a perception. Now, the perception isn't a separate thing. This is the thing. Look, go to the fact of being aware. That's obviously the thing that is aware of your experience, right? What else could be aware of your experience other than the one that is aware of it? Obviously, it's that. So go to the awareness aspect and then try and find some kind of separation between the perception faculty, namely, let's just say sensation, and the awareness of it. So you can do this with your fingers. You can tap your fingers together and just experience what is there in that experience. Do you find two separate things? Do you find a sensation and awareness with a border between them that you can say, yes, the sensation is here and the awareness is there, and I can see the border, it's right there, that's where awareness is and that's where the sensation is? Can you find that? Of course not. The only thing you find is the absolute unity between awareness and the fact of sensing. There's no distance between it. You can't separate those two things. Now, if they were separate, you should be able to separate them because they would be separate. So the evidence would be right there, right? If there's a difference between a cloud and the sky, I should see the sky and I should see the cloud and I should be able to say, this is the sky, this is the cloud. Now, is the sensation like a cloud and is awareness like the sky? Is there two separate things there taking place? Of course not. The minute there is a sensation, you cannot separate the awareness of it. And the minute the awareness is there of the sensation, you can't take the sensation away from the awareness. If you took the sensation away from awareness, where would it even be? You wouldn't be sensing anything at that stage. So the sensation is limited to awareness, but awareness is not limited to the sensation. So notice that your entire experience, the primary background, the blanket, the fabric of your experience is awareness, and awareness is like a continuously perpetuating on switch that is continuously vibrating in the form of your entire experience. So every sound, every smell, every sensation, they're like vibrations of awareness. And the way that you can visualize this is to imagine a sound wave. When you have a sound wave, it's like a flatline field. And the minute the sound wave vibrates, it looks like another object, right? You see the wave and it goes, and then it goes flatline again. I'll try and put a little representation of this on the video.
If we zoom out, it looks like something, right? That looks like a flatline field where there's nothing, and this looks like something, right? But if we zoom in to the something, we find it's actually made of the nothing. The closer we get, the closer we look. If we could go closer, if the system let me, it would just be a one straight line. So, but if we zoom out from a second person perspective, oh look, it's becoming to be something. You see? Absolutely nothing becomes absolutely something. So reality is essentially absolutely unmanifest, pure creative potentiality that vibrates. The closest English words we can use for this is that it vibrates. Our entire experience is a vibration. That's the closest word. I'm not saying it's exactly a vibration, like if I was to ding a bell, but it's a vibration like. And we only experience it as the something, right? Which is what we call, this is like an object, right? The objects in the world. We have nothing, which is pure consciousness. The object appears only from a second person point of view.
A sound wave is like a 2D hologram. Now, we are this experience, vibrating consciousness, like a 3D hologram, except we're not viewing it from another point of view. We are that which is viewing it inside itself. So this is why the observer is the observed, because the thing we're looking at We're not looking at it from another point of view, looking at something separate. We are the thing we're observing, and we are the one observing it. So there's no duality in our experience at all. Everything is completely coherently one. The only time that there seems to be any sort of duality or separation is when we believe that the experience we're having is fundamentally separate from the observer of it. But when we look at the observer and the thing we observe, we never find a distance. We never find any separation. The separation vanishes. So I have a free community. The link is in the description if you'd like to join. I have a mastermind. I take people through these about 4 times a week. This process is heavily devoted to integrating this understanding into the world, so it's not just a load of conceptual jargon. We actually live that way. And that's my priority with the community. So if you want to join, link's right there. Thank you for listening, guys. Take care. Bye.